How will gold and silver act during a crash? Let's find out. Hi everyone, I wanted to make a quick video here to talk a little bit about what it might be like for gold and silver if there was some sort of crash that came about. I know that was one of the questions I had even back last year before the March 2020 crash. So right now, a lot of people worry about stock market crashes and all that, and one of the questions you see that I even had back in the day was, well, how are gold and silver going to act during a crash? So I wanted to quickly go over some of the crashes that I had talked about in a video yesterday. It was a much longer, but I just wanted to kind of quickly go over what I was talking about in that. The first thing I wanted to point out was the cliff dive that all of you are familiar with, that we all saw last year in March 2020. That's the one that everyone pretty much thinks about when they talk about crash, but there's other types of crashes that I wanted to go over very quickly, especially with our high inflationary environment. So that's the first thing that everyone thinks about with crash. But then there's another type where maybe there is a deflation over maybe years. Now I'm using the 10-year here for an example, but if you would just imagine this was the Dow going down over the course of years, just grinding down. Now, maybe this doesn't drop off like a cliff because possibly maybe the Fed is buying corporate bonds. Maybe it's just a form of stagflation where just things just kind of, grind down over a course of time. But you have inflation numbers that are starting to look like this. Venezuelan stock market kind of looked like this over the course of time as well. But so it's more likely that there's a form of melt up in the stock market. But that's one thing that can happen, is just sort of a slow deflation of the stock market. Then you have a situation that people talk about nowadays, like a stagflation, that maybe your favorite equities are range bound for years on end, but this could also be perhaps possibly 3, 4, 5, 10% up over the course of time. But at the same time, if you have inflation that's going up 20, 30, 40% per year, you're actually losing significant amount of purchasing power. So those are the three types of crashes. How will gold and silver fare with these types of crashes? So the first thing that you can look at is, in this type of crash, well, wait a second, maybe everything's just going to drop down. The same thing happened in March 2020, where basically it was margin calls and everybody got out of everything. So there was a quick drop down, and then we saw the spike back up with gold and silver. But is it possible that if you're having a situation where Dow is just kind of grinding down over the course of 2 or 3 years, well, maybe gold and silver don't go down with that. Maybe they go in a different direction. And I talked about this in the video a little bit, where I'd seen previously where, I guess it was February of last year, where I was buying all kinds of miners, and they were going up, and up, and all the Dow was going down. All the stock markets are going down. There was a divergence, and now you could see over the course of time, these things look like they were traveling together, and then they split. So then everything dropped with a cliff, and then they both went in tandem up and up and up and up. And then I guess last year is when gold started splitting down and the Dow continued to go up. And I many of us in this sector got baptized with how our miners have been reacting. But what we had also seen, I guess it was about March of this year, where gold started, turning around and it's going in tandem again. So what I'm looking for, which I think there is a crash going to happen sometime in the next 4 to 8 weeks. Now, can it be a cliff dive, or can it be maybe a gentle pullback? Now, could it be a situation like this? Now, could it be that kind of roll that happens over the course of years, and there's a divergence where the gold goes up and the Dow goes down, and you don't have those sudden margin calls and gold dropping off a cliff and silver dropping off a cliff? So it's quite possible. And no one knows. No one knows if it's going to be like last March, or if the amount of liquidity in the system now will have an effect of having a slower pullback over the course of time. One thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of pressure right now with the interest rates, of course, where they keep talking about maybe we have to raise them a little bit, and then the stock market drops a bunch, and then they walk it back, and so it's quite possible that the interest rates can be range bound between 1.8 and 2, somewhere around there. Maybe they don't go over 2 because they don't want to create the cliff drop, but between 1.8 and 2, maybe you create that situation where it is a kind of a grind. But on the flip side, the inflation is going to keep running rampant. So those are 3 types of crashes I want to talk about, and how gold and silver might react a little bit differently in each one of them. Now, most people right now are aware that there's a deflationary and inflationary fight amongst a lot of the guys out there right now. You have Dent, you got Rickards, Brent Johnson with the dollar milkshake, you got David Hunter. All these guys are talking about like a definitely a deflationary moment in time. Mike Maloney even talks about that as well. On the flip side, you have Peter Schiff, who talks about inflation. So there was a really it was kind of long. It was like a 2-hour video where you had Schiff and who was it? Was it? Yeah, Harry Dent was going against Peter Schiff. It was this great 2-hour long video that they were talking about their arguments for it. But the big picture was Peter Schiff was kind of like, well, a lot of these deflationary guys, they all say that there is going to be a form of deflation followed by massive amounts of inflation. So they do think inflation is going to happen, but they're all calling for deflation first. So it's not like they're only deflation and Peter Schiff is only inflation. They all say it's going to be deflation first and then inflation. And Peter Schiff is kind of like, well, if your end goal is going to be inflation, why even bother planning for that whole deflationary thing? So if you think about it, let's just say, if you're Peter Schiff and you got $10 million in gold, and Harry Dent says, hey, gold is going to be $800 an ounce. Peter Schiff is saying, well, you know what? I'm sitting on my $10 million of gold, and if you tell me next year it's worth $5 million, and then 2 years from now it's worth $20 million, who cares about that drop in the interim? So Peter Schiff's argument is basically who cares if it's going to drop first? Everyone agrees it's going to go up later. Well, to most of us, we would have loved to know when that top was in last March. We would have known to love that, to sell off all of our stuff, wait till everything dropped, and then know miraculously somehow where the bottom was so we can then buy at the bottom, and then somehow, maybe double our pile of money on that. But the truth here is, I think what you have to worry about is, I think you're mostly worried about trying to time a top or time a bottom. And I think that trying to do that is a bit of a fool's errand. Another thing you have to worry about is with Brent Johnson's theory. Now, I don't want to take away from any of these guys. I mean, they're brilliant guys that are coming up with these theories, and I think a lot of you guys are pretty much unfair to a lot of them, by the way. So they're putting some theories out there. They have a lot of good thoughts behind them, and they're great academic studies for what could happen. So I love listening to all of them, and they have different reasons for them, and they have different points, and I just don't want to take away from anything what they're saying here. But if you have something like Brent is saying that the dollar could get to 120, 130, 140, something like that, and the question I have then is, if you're in a situation where maybe inflation becomes well known that it's 8 or 10 or 12 or 14%, if that now starts to become well known, there was that Chippewa index. I'm trying to look for it online. I can't find it. If I do find it, I will link it in the notes. But I'm trying to find that index that Adam was talking about on gold, silver yesterday, I believe it was. That he said that this study, it had the top 500 or so things that people buy, and it tracked that, and it was between 11 and 13% right now. So right now our CPI is somewhere around 2.6%, and this week it's quite possible that it goes up to 3% or more, 4%. I heard it could be. I have no idea, but if it becomes well known that our inflation for things that we buy is actually closer to 11 to 13%, what I think my argument here is that if people know that going into cash is a very bad idea because they're losing purchasing power so quickly. If that DXY were to go up to 120, 130, 140, how quickly would they move that cash into something else? Now, I'm a proponent here. I think it's going to go into gold and silver and miners like crazy. I've been all in on this for the better part of a year, and I could be wrong, but another bet would be like, okay, well, the stock market crashes in a sense, and they pull out all kinds of money, and then the DXY goes way up, but then people then buy back in at the bottom again, and there's this boom and bust cycle that happens, every year for the next 5-10 years. So no one really knows what's going to happen with a lot of that. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring up this subject in the video is that I had a longer type of video yesterday where I was discussing the fact that I was getting out of all my short-term options. Well, when I did that, they're all mostly minors. And it's quite possible that in a very short period of time that it's very possible that, again, none of these miners go down. It's quite possible that this situation happens where it's a slight deflation type of thing in the stock market, and it's quite possible that gold and silver continue to go up, and my short-term options may have made a fortune, but the fact that I got out of them, that was me avoiding downside risk. Now, what I also did with this was I had problems with my upside risk then too, because I got out of them. So no one knows what's really going to happen, but there are some different arguments here for different types of crashes. What I would suggest, and that's what I was looking at with my end, was with the short-term options, these can all go to zero. And in the Peter Schiff argument, if you're sitting there and holding equities, and they're all gold equities and mining and all that stuff, and next week they all drop by half, and they're all going to reflate in 6 months. Peter Schiff says, just, who cares? It doesn't matter. It's whatever. The rest of us kind of want that intel. Is when can we cut, and then when is everything going to drop off, and then when can we buy in low on all that? So this isn't advising that at all. It's just talking about the different types of risks. So one of the things you can also look up, it's very easy, is right now that the amount of leverage that we have in the stock market right now is pretty much an all-time high with margin. So if there is any kind of cliff drop, you're looking at massive amounts of margin getting unwound very, very quickly. And that would not be good for gold and silver in a very short term. And then that would, I was figuring that silver, let's just use $50 target, whether it's next week, next month, next year, it's going to happen. But let's just say silver is $16 next week because the stock market crashes. One of the things I was bringing up with the Commitment Traders report, one of the things we talk about with, this massive short position, which is now actually close to 900 million ounces. If silver does drop significantly again, it can present a situation like what happened to JP Morgan last year, where they bought out of all the short positions, and then you saw silver, pop way up. So, and that's what's been reported. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that. So, what it can be right now is if there is some sort of drop that does happen like this, and gold and silver do drop very quickly like this, you have a whole bunch of people that are short that would love to buy back very low. And what happens is if they're all buying back very, very low and getting out of these short positions, at that point in time, let's just say the shorted at 24, 25, 26, and you can buy it back at 13, 14, 15 on a COMEX or whatever it is, and you can undo a whole bunch of those things. You're going to push that price way back up very quickly. So whether $50 is next week, next month, or next year, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And that's the Schiff argument here. Most of us just, we want the intel as to exactly when it's going to happen. And no one has that. I don't know if it's going to crash next week, next month, 5 years from now. But I wanted to just present to you that gold and silver can diverge. And if the stock market does roll over, and who knows, it can continue to go up, and gold can go up with it in tandem like it did before. But I think pretty much everyone agrees that the stock market is completely overvalued right now. And on top of that, I think everyone can kind of agree when a lot of the stimulus stops and a lot of the programs at least slow down and they taper, what's keeping this balloon expanded at the point. So is it going to pop, or is it going to just slowly deflate? No one really knows. But one of the biggest things is just, for anyone out there, I'm seeing like that the YOLO stuff into certain cryptos. Don't do any of that right now. There's a lot of volatility going on right now. So, whether you're all in or you're taking profits on certain things right now, there's going to be a lot of different ways that this can play out. So pay attention over the next month or 2 months. For all I know, this can keep going on for the next year or two, 3 years. Don't know how long they can keep it going, but these are just some things to keep in mind, and how gold and silver might react in those types of crashes. So with that, thanks a lot.
And as always, guys, please don't forget to like and subscribe to our channels. It helps the algorithm in YouTube send this video out more and more. We really appreciate all your support. Till next time.